All right, kicking it off, onward to our next session. I'm very excited to introduce Mariano. And Mariano's there. Hello, Mariano.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Thank you for joining us today. Let me give you a little introduction of your brilliance before we start chatting. So the session is titled The Roller Coaster Life of a Resilient Entrepreneur. How to get past 100 million ARR, what mistakes to avoid, and how to keep sane through the 11-year-long journey. Mariano is a technology entrepreneur, co-founder and executive chairman of Mural, a collaborative platform used by global enterprises. He is also a co-founder of 3 Melons, an active angel investor, a startup advisor who's also passionate about helping people connect and realize their dreams through modern innovation, which is probably one of the reasons why he's willing to chat with us today. We first met in 2012, Mariano. We're young, or, that feels like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Where was that? I was Buenos Aires and dinner out on the street, I think, with about a dozen entrepreneurs.
Going on. Buenos Aires, yes, Palermo, before I moved to California, and now in Miami.
So before you started Mural, you co-founded 3 Melons, a game studio based in Buenos Aires. And you say it better than I don't have the accent. But tell us, why did you start a gaming company? Are you a big gamer?
I was getting older, less so, but again, now with the kids, maybe back again. And I was doing another startup before that. Again, we didn't know what we were doing, but I was curious to start something around games for sure. And in Latin America, it was hard because there was no gaming industry at all. Like Microsoft, Nintendo, or Sony console gamers, they didn't develop over there because there was no market. So there were no studios and etc. So I had to figure out how to do games in another platform. And I thought that would be good to do games on Flash for advertising purposes. So that's where I thought it was a good idea for brands to engage with their audiences through games. And it was a good way for us to get into the video gaming industry that was not possible back when. And the other thing that wasn't possible or we didn't know how to do is we never actually built any games before starting that company, which is.
So how did you learn? The story that you told me about is that you provided games for Lego, Disney, Warner Brothers, Mattel, MTV, and many others. From going from creating no games to being an expert in it in Buenos Aires seems like quite a unique story. Yeah.
So first things first is we had a point of view. We started to tell the story of what could be, right? And then we of course got a bunch of folks that had the capabilities but never did this new challenge, right? They did e-learning software or I don't know, other types of entertainment. So the capabilities were there, the actual product were not. But again, we were pitching on ideas to folks and try to focus on talking to a certain type of people, right? Folks that would spend a lot of money on online commerce and trying to become the best known brand, at least first in Latin America. Then we started selling to everywhere else that we could actually, again, provide a new solution for their problems. We knew that they needed high engagement with their audiences and they were not getting it through traditional media. So we pitched them on solving the problem, even though it was a game, right? How can games solve problems? Well, in their case, it's more evident because they had to engage and sell more stuff, whatever they were selling. So again, focusing on the problem basically and putting us in a position of privilege that we were the right ones to solve that problem.
Cool. So you ended up selling 3 Melons to Playdom, and then Disney acquired Playdom. Sometimes entrepreneurs have regret when they sell businesses, or sometimes they're thrilled. Obviously, a big opportunity is hopefully selling and or exiting or going public at the right time. That's contextually relevant for the company. How did you feel after that transition, or any regrets looking back at that time period?
So I always tell people that I analyze the thing strategically, financially, professionally, and I didn't do as much of a cultural due diligence, right? The reality was that the first three made total sense, right? We had like a great creative capability, but not good distribution and monitoring and management of products. So made sense. Financially, it's a very good outcome for investors, founders, employees. I was like 30, also like a nice entrepreneurial look. It was confidence building also. And then professionally, that, and also we got to work with folks that did have a lot of experience building games and running games and so forth from all over the world, right? So it was like a good thing. The first relevant company to get acquired in Argentina. Again, the games industry was founded, but culturally, it wasn't a good fit. So again, I ended up coming up with Mural and leaving after a year. But again, that lessons learned for the future. And so good news is that again, we learned a lot and starting something new.
So that's a perfect segue, Mariano. So what's the biggest thing that you learned that you wanted to do differently and that you tried to do differently in the early days of Mural? And then we'll talk more about Mural leading into today.
Sure. So, well, first is that because I did a lot of mistakes in that journey, but the one that did not make a mistake is like I designed the company from scratch to try to make it a world-class big company, right? So like trying to get direct to customers versus having to rely on others, right? That's important. Again, right now, Mural, fortunately, we have like all of our revenue. I think all of our revenue is direct, right? So like we have like direct contact with folks that.
So you mean direct, Mariano, versus resellers or partner agreements where you weren't interacting with the customer? Is that what you mean by direct?
Or through weird thing, advertising or
sure, got it,
and so on, right? So yes, I mean it's folks that again we provide a service to recurrently. They need all the time. Then the other one versus games is like a fashion business in a way, right? So like there's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of platform changes also, again, consoles, mobile, VR, whatever. So this one was also like again more steady, predictable, recurring business, and so on.
So tell us a little bit. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, man. Sorry. Go ahead.
Those were the ones. Like there are the two that I wish I had done. We can talk about them in a bit.
In a little bit, yeah. So give the context to the audience. Why did you start Mural? What was the first product and customer use case that you were focused on in the early days? I think it was a couple of months after or during when we met in Buenos Aires.
Yeah. So the games company turned from a company developing games for others to a company that produced its own first game, a game called Bola, a soccer game played by 20 million people during 2010, 1 million per day in the World Cup. So again, that was like our metamorphosis. It was really hard to switch from a services company to a product company, but we were able to pull it off. And of course, once you are a products company, especially in entertainment, actually you evolve the same product and you versions 1, 2, 3, 4, Fast and the Furious, I think it's Fast and the Furious 11 now, right? Or you have like a portfolio of games.
Sure.
And so I was designing a new game, a game about emotions, and a game about dance, a game about like art toys. There's a lot of art toys here. And it was a complex thing. And I was using a PowerPoint deck to collect stuff and inspiration digitally. I was traveling back and forth from Buenos Aires to the Bay Area. So I was using a versionized PowerPoint decks and taking it back and forth with, again, media for inspirations. And when I was sharing the work in progress, people were confused, right? Because again, I was going backwards and forwards with the slide and so forth. And then because my delivery wasn't clear, the reception wasn't clear, they were also expecting it to be done, right? So PowerPoint decks are designed to present something that's done in general, not work in progress. And I was trying to co-create with them more than present the final thing, right? So I figured that there was a missing component in a digital workplace, again, 15 years ago, well, 13 years, whatever, a long time ago. And again, there were alternatives like, Prezi or again, online.
And also the browsers back then were not really conducive to online collaboration like we do today. I mean, everybody in the audience probably says, well, this seems normal. I mean, there's also other collaboration platforms, and Mural has taken off and has amazing audience of customers. But back then, I still remember, I mean, it was even early days for Google shared collaboration or other docs. It wasn't easy to do.
Yeah, blinking cursors on the different parts of the document. But when we introduced the idea of like floating arrows, I mean, being live broadcasted, I remember we were in IDO in 2014 or 13 maybe. Like we were like, wow, like live presence, and it feels like it's in the same room and so forth. And I say yes, but it was still like early versions of WebSocket. So yeah, it was not as smooth as today.
Absolutely not. I mean, I remember the early, some of the early beta projects. I think Access, I got in, and it was, I believed in the vision, and I still believe in, it's amazing you validated. Tell us a little bit, from those early days, what was the biggest challenge that you had finding product market fit? This is something that all the company, audience, entrepreneurs and or researchers that want to start businesses or that are building businesses. And you and I talked about this yesterday or a couple of days ago in our kind of pre-chat. It's so challenging to find product market fit, or what is that defined? And most people try to satisfy many different customers, but you had a very strong opinion of this. So I'd love to hear how you figured it out and what your advice is.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, at 100 million in ARR, the market is relatively big, right? Different types of people, different use cases, and the product is already like a beast of sorts, right?
Right.
But when you get started, is less so, right? So in order to so basically product market fit like a fluid thing, right? It's like like the market evolves and also gets bigger, hopefully not smaller, but could happen. The product also evolves, gets modular or whatever. So I think that the biggest challenge or mistakes. So of course, like I started designing this for myself, right? For again, game design or collaborative game design and so forth. And I think that we had this weird ambition and again, lack of methodology, because again, we had just like 20 million people use our game. It's like, okay, well, 20 million is now the standard. And you don't get to 20 million just because, right? You get to like the first million first and so on, the first 100,000, the first 1,000, the first 10. So I think that early on, we started with something very open-ended, and we opened up, and a lot of people started exploring it because again, it was like it was fun. Also, it was like a fun little toy, let's call it. But then, of course, we saw a lot of people like come in, use the toy, and then leave. So I think that the first thing, and I think that there's more methodology these days and more know-how, and all this again, wait lists and things help with that. Which is we didn't pick a segment of the market, right? Like whichever that one was, it could have been just game designers, entrepreneurs.
Well, yeah, you said the segment was basically people like yourself, but obviously sometimes it's important to focus on things like solving our own problems, but at other times not knowing if there's enough other people with the same issue.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if there were, that could have been a good choice, right? I mean, if there are enough game designers or whatever around the world that have this problem, okay, just focus on them and deliver a full enough solution so that you can check if they would be willing to stick around and pay. In our case, with a subscription model, right? So I think that was like the first thing, like just like being deliberate and obsessed by one segment at a time. Doesn't mean that then once you sort that out, you can go to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one, right? But not being disciplined enough on picking. For example, I was looking at all of your presentations, right? So the human bionics company, which I thought was spectacular. Still in your presentation, like humans or people, of course, people that need a little help, right? But they probably are selling or targeting, I don't know, former athletes that had an accident, for example, that are more like, okay, they already knew. I'm just making this up.
Sure.
But once you dominate that one and have like then you go to, I don't know, whatever.
So for their example is exactly multiple sclerosis is their main target. Anybody that has that, and the next one might be stroke. And they're getting very pragmatic, as you said, but it's also, being a hardware software in that space. But to you as well. So what ended up being the biggest use case that you validated when the tipping point, said, okay, we've got it. It might not be 100 million in ARR yet, but this is the one, or this is the two that really were driving.
It was one that it was, I think, still a little too broad, but were folks that were believers in the religion or the practice of design thinking, right? So like folks that cared about a visual way of working with these frameworks around like understanding customer journeys, understanding personas, and using these methodologies to understand problems and solve problems. Those were the spots where we started to pick up. That being said, it was still like multiple industries, so it was more like a targeting through job to be done, let's call it, which I think it's good, but I think that we could have done more on like job to be done and particular segment, because we had folks on pre-sales doing customer discovery, we still have them, and we also had folks doing strategy innovation, and we had like folks doing new product development and UI. So all of those ask you for things, the Salesforce integration, the whatever OKR software integration, and it's like, how do you prioritize, right? And how do you sell? How do you...
Exactly. And so one of the things, obviously, you mentioned those words, and in the earlier days when we started LDV Capital, we were saying we were thesis focused fun in visual tech, and everybody said, "What's visual tech?" And you're saying, "Hey, the platform is a visual experience, it's a virtual visual collaboration." Back then, were you having also similar challenges? Because people were not really, up until recently, it's been exponentially growing, but 8 and 9 and 10 years ago, it wasn't mainstream, the goal to visually communicate and collaborate.
So again, there were early adopters and believers of the methodologies, right? So design, agile, whatever. And then there, of course, like early adopters and believers of remote work. And the intersection, that Venn diagram was slim, right? Because they know it's important to be in the same spot, and the workshops and the sticky notes and the smell of Sharpies. And then the remote people, not all of them understood the importance of methodology, right? In our case, when we started, we didn't know about design thinking, lean startup, experimentation, and many other methodologies and best practices that we know about modern day innovation, which is my thing. So again, but I didn't have like a great selection criteria to find that intersection, and that intersection could have been enough for us to get started. And again, we can go into one of the big challenges that at some point we basically ran out of money and basically had to like restart.
So tell us, give us some more details about how that happened and what you learned from that, because everybody, obviously, it's this roller coaster life of ups and downs. Nobody ever feels like they're going to deal with that or wants to deal with that, but many companies go through that scary time period. How did you deal with it?
Yeah. So again, as I said, like, I wish that I would have focused more, and if we focus more, probably like, it would be more compact, and so forth. But at some point, we were not. So we were growing good enough for whatever company in the world, but not good enough for VC-backed companies, right? So like the standard was 3x, 2x, 2x to 100 million in ARR. We 0.x'd our way to 2017 and then accelerated, right? 2019, sorry. In 2017, we had raised chunks of seed investment, and we were making revenue. But
how much did you raise, Mariano? How much specifically?
I think it was 1.2 in all those chunks.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe a little more. But we were making revenue, but it wasn't enough to support the company. And we were going to be having like a cash hole and a big IBM like client that we didn't know if we were going to be renewing or not. So it was like a moment of revenue concentration, cash flow, and so forth. And our investors had been supporting us for a while, but they didn't see the VC returns coming. So again, we had to make a choice if we kept on going or not. And because, again, we were having fun still, this was already 5 years in, we had a lot of things to try. And of course, we have customers asking us, again, concentrated, and it was starting to shape the type of customer. We decided to keep on going, and we basically bought back the company from original investors. Again, it's atypical. We had money from selling the company before. Not most founders don't have that luxury. But also we had to like make a big bet, and it was like a big chunk of our personal money, right?
Yeah, so, it's a huge risk, but you definitely believed in it. I mean, that must have been a scary period.
Yeah, well, we believed at least that we could have like a nice little lifestyle business, right? Maybe because again, as a majority shareholder or whatever, you don't need to like make it VC because you don't need to like buy by the company. Just provides a salary, provides maybe dividends or whatever. So that was like the path for a while. But then, of course, starting in 2019, so more people working with these methodologies, more people working remotely, and the overlap of people working with these methodologies plus remote were starting to become bigger. Our clients, we started to have other big clients, not just like a big concentrated one. So it started to diversify. So it became more of an attractive revenue stack. We had like a nice cake chart where you saw the compounding net dollar retention stacking next to each other. And so again, an investor that I had known, a friend that had like a thesis on underfunded companies that maybe found something interesting, like more like a growth type investor, but for small companies. He was the only term sheet that we had on the Series A. I tried to find others, but again, it was still like my history didn't show that we could do like the 2x, 3x, 3x, 2x, 2x, 2x thing. But then of course the pandemic made the circles overlap and pulled us into like.
So the pandemic was really the next driver that took you to the next level. And that was after you raised that next funding, or
we raised the funding in 2019.
Right.
Didn't know about the incoming thing, and
the
we're
pandemic.
planning to again double, right? The in 2020, and then we quadrupled.
You quadrupled during the pandemic.
Yes.
Wow.
So it was nuts. Yeah,
but obviously also validating
revenue, right? Much more in terms of usage. So it was.
Yeah, I mean, validating the collaboration as everybody was stranded either in their homes or in remote collaboration took off. And so how do you see
remote was happening before. The things like remote for this particular type of job to be done that we're supporting, people preferred to be in person with a client in a workshop or whatever, but now they had no choice. And now, of course, like the post-pandemic, well, it's not really needed all the time. It's great to be in person once or twice per year with your team, or maybe 4 times per year with your team, with your client once per year. And that's okay, as long as we design our collaboration digitally the way, I mean, to support for the outcomes that we want to accomplish.
Got it. And so one of the things you mentioned, we're talking about obviously a resilient entrepreneur. And I think you might have came up with that word, or maybe I did, or we collaborated together on that. And so those downturns, I mean, how did you keep sane, or, the challenging times? What do you do for yourself, and what would you advise other entrepreneurs? Because, as an entrepreneur myself, I had many downtimes, and also as an investor, it's harder for the entrepreneurs. And it seems like the advice that you might have learned or did for yourself would help them.
So yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate to have a supporting wife. We moved from Argentina to and had kids and had like I play tennis. I'm not just someone that works all the time. I work a lot, so looks like works all the time, but it's really like. I was able, we always sleep, right? Again, the only entertainment that I did on the pandemic was sleeping, but I was able to sleep. Super important. Yes, I woke up at 6 a.m., had a coffee, and started working, right? So like the workout part, maybe not so much. But
so it sounds like you use exercise. I mean, play tennis, and exercise. A lot of people suggest that. I suggest that all the time.
sleep and exercise for sure, and then of course like in my case I had a great family, growing kids. It was hard also. Like I launched Mural when I had our first kid. Now he's now 11, well, turning 11, 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. So it's intense.
Do you feel like, I mean, supporting family and friends is absolutely critical. And sometimes other entrepreneurs find, say, they have 2 or 3 other entrepreneurs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, other folks that have done some similar journey before you, and you had a few that are friends, close friends now that gave me peace of mind, right? When we had to do this recap, one of them like gave me the advice like, hey, none of these. So we've been taught that the traditional budget, we seed A, B, C, D, IPO, and that's
right.
How people believe that it's reality, and it's like an axiom of sorts. And the reality is like there's different paths to get to different spots, right? So that's the other thing. Like what you're supposed to do is all made up. Like everything.
I mean, you can follow playbooks, but you have to figure out what's best for you and your situation and your team.
Exactly. And I even told. I mean, I told. So it's Bessemer, right? That they said that it's the extra. I don't think live in a stage like something like this. Like, hey, guys, like you kind of like screwed us, right? Like, you gave us like a pain in the ass standard to go after that again. In not necessarily the right one, right? It's of course like it's a. I mean, they analyze the past and the past shows XYZ, but it might not be the thing, and especially like in now the modern era of that we're embarking on AI, right? Like, I mean, let's not just copy the playbook of what has worked in the past, because there's a lot of best practice, but again, it's hard to say that.
And yeah, exactly. It's best practice, but you also have to, it's also good to go outside, live outside and work outside the box. We've got about 4 minutes left, Mariano.
Yeah, that best practice though that stays the same though, which is again the big learning is like focus on the customers that have the pain point, and be patient on getting to the next focus. You cannot focus on 2 things at the same time by definition. You can have like many satellites focusing on multiple things, but you as a CEO entrepreneur, or again, when you delegate, can only focus on one thing at a time. So like and I see all these AI companies building great, magical, brain busting things, but they are good for everything and everyone. I was like, fuck, that's the same thing. Problem.
Anything and everyone and no one, because
same mistake that I made, right? So it's really hard because even though AI will be solving a lot of problems, people are still going to be buying. Right, so you need to like convince a set of folks that have certain set of problems, that have options, and they have limited. They cannot remember much, especially so around the brand, around like being all around them. Super important. And again, I think that will be like the biggest takeaway from this is like focus on and be deliberate for a while, right? And even in your website, like we are the AI computer vision software that helps policemen on highways identify fast moving car. But again, be super specific and putting everywhere and telling your grandma or your sister or whatever, we are that for that particular audience, versus calling it we're an AI company that helps computer
everybody.
Vision.
Makes sense. It's great advice. So tell me, there's a couple minutes left. What one visual tech are you most excited about for in the next 20 years? I mean, we talked about this over coffee, I think. I don't remember where we were. But come on, the one thing that like, oh my God, you want and you're excited to have.
It's not something for next 20 years. I was joking around on the social media thing, but if there was like a little vacuum cleaner sorter of Lego toys that you can combine that with instructions and sorts it out again and repackages the builds, that's like probably like a current thing that is available with the technology today.
Sure. You also mentioned Jarvis.
Yeah, so that is happening also, right? Like I think that the nice combination of something like Mural with LLMs is that, and also like a little 3D, is again you can actually get to like a thinking partner, right? And complement each other. visually also. So yeah, I mean, I think that like it's outstanding to see. Again, they can check on Iron Man and say like, well, that could happen, and also Ultron can happen, right? Like, so
sure, absolutely. One of the questions I always love asking during these fireside chats, and we actually put them all together. In one word answers, we're going to close on this, Mariano. In one word answer, what's the best personality trait and worst personality trait for an entrepreneur?
Well, so I've been mentioning a few things. You mentioned resilience, of course. Hopefully, you don't have to be as resilient as some of others because you've done your homework and focused, right?
Right. Focus.
So because if you focus and achieve little milestones all the time, you have to worry less about like resilience, right? Because in a way, right, you're kind of like just getting like feedback loops of positiveness. Right. But of course, like things happen and you will happen. So resilience is also, I mean, a good component. And the other thing is, like, I think that super important is like if you feel energy drainage from people around you, be swift to take action and remove that from your plate.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's very smart. What do you think is the worst personality trait for an entrepreneur?
Well, probably lack of coachability, right? Because the reality is, like, by definition, I always tell people, I've never been the CEO of a company this size. When the new class of folks joining Mural, right? Like, if you don't embrace that, then how are you gonna be letting go? How are you gonna be learning? How are you be able to recruit other folks and letting them sort things out for you? So again, coachability or lack of, I would say, would be, which relates to vulnerability and so on, right? Yeah,
fantastic, Mariano. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. I'll thank you on behalf of all the people in the audience for sharing your insights and wisdom. Hopefully you stick around. Maybe some people have some questions in chat, and look forward to seeing you again real soon. Thanks again, Mariano.